Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. And I might just mention it is Wednesday. I was just on with American Family Radio, and Tim Wildman reminded everybody it was Wednesday and said that one of the reasons is because a lot of people forget what day it is, starting to forget what year it is sometimes as well. So just wanted to mention that. In about a half an hour, we're going to have Representative Van Taylor with us, an individual that first served in the Texas House of Representatives, then in the Texas Senate, and is now a member of Congress in the 3rd Congressional District. We'll talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, which I'm sure he probably will vote for, but we'll also talk about at a time when this stimulus package, the 3 stimulus packages alone have, first of all, increased federal spending by half, quadrupled the deficit, and will eventually trigger the largest monetary increase or expansion since the Civil War. There are some questions about it, not the least of which I also want to talk with him about the fact that the big companies made their way to the congressional trough first. Small businesses that were supposed to be helped are still out there waiting, and that includes also small ministries, churches, and all the rest. So we will get into that and spend a little bit of time talking with him. Then at the 1 o'clock hour, we have a recording, a tape that I've already done with Pastor Jack Graham, who is the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church. We'll talk about some of these very important issues, because we are now starting to talk about, and I want to get into this pretty quickly, opening up the country. And as we do so, that, of course, is going to raise some very important issues, because there is the possibility that we could get a rebound, as has happened in Singapore. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that, according to Dr. Sapphire, appeared on Fox News. Actually, this is a commentary that she's done. We've seen this before. For every 1% increase in unemployment, we can see a 3.6% increase in overdose deaths, 1% increase in suicide. For those of you that ever watched the movie Big Short, there was a character that Brad Pitt played, and at one point when people were getting excited that they had figured out how to short the market, he turns around to him and said, "Do you realize that if for every 1% increase in unemployment, there's 40,000 deaths in America?" Did you know that? Now, again, that's not quite accurate, but it was a great moment in the film to remind you that when we had the Great Recession, there were consequences. At a time when we have 22 million people out of work, there are other consequences. We oftentimes talk about the medical consequences, and now we're going to have some people talking about the economic consequences. But there's also another set of issues, and that's sort of, if you will, what we might call the healthcare consequences. Individuals that are in the healthcare business that are losing their jobs, they're being fired or furloughed, hospitals going bankrupt, businesses going bankrupt, but people, because they just can't take it anymore, commit suicide or get involved in drug overdoses or a number of other things. So that is something that certainly Pastor Jack Graham has addressed in his church. That's one of the reasons they have a life recovery program. And so we're going to get into that a little bit with him. And then also we hopefully will have Michael Perrin on again. He was supposed to be with us on Monday, but got sick. And let's hope that he gets healthy and we can get him back on the program. But as I mentioned, the experiments are about ready to begin. Governors in Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Ohio have announced on Monday that they would begin peeling back some of the curbs on commerce and social activity. So those are all Republican governors, but not to be outdone, at least one Democratic governor, and that would be in Colorado, also said Tuesday he would open some retail stores. So we'll see where that goes. And I want to spend some significant time looking at the state of Georgia next hour, if for no other reason than because many of our listeners are in the state of Georgia. And the governor, Brian Kemp, has now begun to allow various non-essential businesses to reopen. Of course, the essential businesses have been open, but he wants to open those as well. And that has led to skepticism from, of course, governors in places like Atlanta and a variety of other places that are criticizing that, as well as some healthcare individuals. And so he announced on Monday that hair salons, barbershops, even tattoo parlors, massage therapists, gyms might be opened as soon as Friday. Some of the small business owners said they were kind of caught off by surprise, and they said, we're maybe not ready to ramp up yet, so we will not open. Others simply said, we're going to stay closed until we are convinced that the healthcare crisis is past. And so this is not mandating that you open, but it will be interesting to see what unfolds in Savannah and Atlanta and a number of other places. And in case you're wondering, I showed this chart the other day, or the views for of you that may be watching online, you can probably see that there's a red line here, and that's New York. But you might say, what are these other lines up here? Well, this one, interestingly enough, is Albany, Georgia. Now, the bottom line is this is actually a chart of deaths per 100,000. So it doesn't mean that many people died. What it does mean is that in that kind of hot spot where there were individuals, and of course, a lot of these have to do with nursing homes. If it goes through a nursing home, it goes through very quickly. But again, you can see that if we're looking at deaths per 100,000, of course, New Orleans is the other one here, but the one that exceeds New York is Georgia. But it is, again, in one locale, and that's Albany, Georgia. As you have heard me say before, I finally found this chart. It's not a very good chart, I must admit, because it's a screen capture. You would think that Dr. Deborah Birx, who put this on the screen on Friday, would have it somewhere, and it may exist somewhere, but I still simply can't find it. But it's the point I was making before. That is, if you look at New York City, it, as a metropolitan area, just shoots up like this. The other 24 metropolitan cities all just hug the X line there. So that is a point that we have made before. And the other day, I mentioned the piece by Dennis Prager. We've posted that today, in which he simply asked this question. If half the country's deaths were in Montana, would New York shut down? And actually, before he gets to Montana, he uses another example, and he uses, of course, these interesting states that are now maybe going to open. If indeed you opened up North Carolina and Georgia, which are two contiguous states that have a population similar to New York's metropolitan area, if indeed half of the people in America were dying just in Georgia and North Carolina, would the people in New York go along with shutting down all of New York City? And of course, the question is hypothetical, but it illustrates again that New York City is in a fairly unique set of circumstances, which brings me to this incredible argument. Escape from New York City. Many New York citizens and residents are packing up their apartments and heading for the hills or the suburbs to escape the pandemic, some permanently. And so they have some stories there of people that are willing to sell their apartments, their homes, or whatever in some of the New York metropolitan area to just simply get out of there. And so it is kind of an intriguing set of circumstances that have unfolded there, as, of course, New York City has been the hot spot in the nation. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we're learning. One real interesting surprise is that people were dying of COVID-19 back in February before any of the official records said that there was the first death. We also have a majority of Americans back Donald Trump's immigration plan. Then we want to hear from some healthcare experts at Stanford and Yale who are suggesting that maybe these changes from the lockdown might actually work. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
3 states have voter ID laws, but one of those states, Virginia, just struck down the requirement to show identification before voting. The governor signed the bill, arguing that voting is a fundamental right. That is true, and all the more reason to make sure voter fraud does not take place. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama announced a nationwide push to have every state vote by mail and allow people to register online. Progressives have tried to eliminate voter ID laws and promote liberal policies towards voting for years, but they've had limited success until now. Concerns about the virus pandemic, they believe, might provide sufficient justification for altering our election laws. The argument against voter ID is difficult to make in a society that requires identification for just about everything. You need an ID to buy a cell phone. You need an ID to open a bank account. You need an ID to rent or buy a house or to apply for a mortgage. You need an ID to rent a car or even drive a car. You need an ID to get on an airplane, and you need an ID to apply for food stamps or to apply for Medicaid and Social Security. Having the entire nation vote by mail means that all of those votes are cast without any election official overseeing the process. We don't know if there was undue influence or intimidation. We also know that voter registration rolls are often inaccurate and out of date. Someone could vote in place of someone who died, and we might never know it. Absentee voting by mail is helpful for some and can be allowed for certain circumstances, but having all Americans vote by mail is a temptation for voter fraud and would endanger the security and integrity of the election process. The pandemic cannot be used as an excuse for changing elections in America. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, just for a few more minutes, let's look at some of the issues of the pandemic, and then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have a chance to talk with Representative Van Taylor, kind of get a feel for what is happening there, the passing of all sorts of stimulus and rescue packages, and where do we go from here. So we'll be talking with him. And, of course, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, maybe you have some thoughts about the Paycheck Protection Program. Maybe you have some questions about the amount of money that the government is spending. Maybe you want to talk about Nancy Pelosi's ice cream, which has now become a campaign ad or whatever. There's all sorts of opportunities for you to join us. 1-800-351-1212. Jack Graham will be with us the next hour. He's the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church, and we'll talk about some of the mental issues, the church and mental issues and mental health. So those are all topics we will address. But let me pick out a couple of more issues here. And the first is, yesterday you might remember, if you were listening, that we have a lot more information from Santa Clara County, which is in California. And because of that, we are learning quite a bit about, first of all, how many people actually have the virus but are asymptomatic. And they've also done some posthumous studies on individuals that have died and concluded that individuals who died at home on February 6th and on February 17th, according to these autopsy reports, actually most likely died of COVID-19. So they now appear to be the first confirmed coronavirus fatalities in this country. And notice that these occur on the 6th of February and the 17th of February before you have the first recorded death of COVID-19, which was on February 27th, which again gives credence to the idea that maybe there has been some herd immunity, not as much as I think some people are trying to extrapolate, but the idea of herd immunity is that a number of people in the herd, I always hate that they use that phrase, a number of people have the virus, had antibodies for it, never really had any negative symptoms for it, and so as a result, even though they were asymptomatic, theoretically, if once you have antibodies, you don't get the virus again, means that they are safe. Now, there is some evidence, at least from one country, I think South Korea, that maybe just because you have the antibodies doesn't mean you wouldn't get it again. But generally, there is an assumption that once you get those antibodies, that is the case. Matter of fact, that's really what the vaccines are. A vaccine, in many cases, give you an attenuated version of a virus, for example, in many cases, so that you build up the antibodies. So again, the assumption is if you have those antibodies, that will give you some protection. But anyway, we'll leave that for another discussion. And I haven't mentioned this until now, but it's worth mentioning because now we have some polls out. And that is just the other day, President Donald Trump, really out of the blue, talked about having a temporary immigration ban. That caught a lot of people off guard. Of course, then you saw the hue and cry, the Statue of Liberty is crying, and this is just not America. This is not what we should do. First of all, if you think this ban is universal, it's not. Matter of fact, Dennis Prager has talked about this. Tucker Carlson last night talked about there are all sorts of exemptions, some pretty big exemptions in it. So for this temporary immigration ban, and it is temporary, nevertheless, we now have studies and reports and surveys that show that about 70% of registered voters believe the federal government should place a temporary ban on allowing people to come in from any other country to enter the United States. There might be a very good reason for that. First of all, we don't know whether or not they have the virus, whether or not they're asymptomatic, but there's a bigger economic issue. And at a time when there are so many individuals, almost 20% unemployment in America, does it make any sense to bring more people in to actually take those jobs, in some cases, away from Americans? And the answer is no. Now, I will tell you the rest of the story. The H-1B and guest worker programs and some of those don't look like they're affected by this, so it isn't quite the comprehensive ban on immigration you might be led to think. But nevertheless, 70%, and that's about as close as you get to near unanimous support. I saw one survey that came out the other day. It was in the 80 percentile. So, again, most Americans think that's a good idea. What was interesting in the Rasmussen survey is at least a third, that is 34% of Americans, believe that even Americans living abroad right now should have to wait until the pandemic is over before being allowed to return. That's not a majority, but it was a significant minority. A third of all of them also said, maybe we should leave them over there as well. So those are some ideas about this. Of course, the other day, Donald Trump was asked about this. He said, of course, it's a high number of people that believe in this. And he said, no, look, I think the American people want to be sure that they have jobs for the American people, not for people coming in many cases, illegal in out of the country. Unless you think it's only Republicans here, well, it was 82% of Republicans in this survey agreed with that, but 66% of independents and 64% of Democrats. A majority of Republican, Democrats, and independents all agreed with the immigration ban. But again, let me just hasten to add that it is not the comprehensive ban you might be led to think. We'll get to that a little bit later, but I thought just before I take a break, let me quote from two individuals that we have quoted from before. The first is Dr. David Katz. You might remember when I posted a piece that came out of the New York Times. That was a quote from some of the work that he is doing at the Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center, board-certified specialist in preventive medicine. And he, at the time, has said, we really need to think about this in a more specific way. He says, if you're going to call this pandemic a war, if you're going to use war as a metaphor, well, then let's talk about a surgical strike. Let's focus on those people which were most vulnerable rather than having this kind of universal, comprehensive lockdown. And David Katz went on to say, I understand the potential for a contagion like this to hurt people, to kill people, but I'm also trained in social determinants of health and how food insecurity and unemployment and social upheaval can translate into health devastation, which is one of the reasons why we'll be talking about that next hour. And he also said that this idea of a one-size-fits-all strategy of shutting everything down has the potential, he says, to hurt more people than it's helped. And I already have given you this idea. So if you're going to use war as kind of a metaphor, then let's use this idea of a surgical strike. Let's now move from Yale University to Stanford University, and John Idandis is a professor of medicine, statistics, epidemiology, and population health. And he, again, is pointed out in his paper on the studies of the fatality rate of COVID-19, found that the risk for people under the age of 65 was equivalent to driving the death rate from driving 400 miles per day in New York City. In other words, the bottom line is, he said, I started looking at the type of information we had, how solid is the evidence that is guiding decisions that we have made monumental impact on saving lives and also potentially harming lives because of the consequence of some of the measures. And he said it became very obvious to me that the evidence that we had through the early phases of the pandemic was utterly unreliable. We had to make decisions on the numbers that we have. And he says many of the numbers that were circulating were based on how many patients we were seeing who had symptoms or got tested, and then how many of those died. And so the estimate there, he points out, of course, is very high. Put another way, you've got two numbers. You've got your numerator, the one on the top. We do know that number. That's the number of people that have died. But the denominator, the number underneath, was originally fairly small because the only people that we were testing for whether or not they had the antibodies for COVID-19 were in most cases people being tested because they thought they were sick or because they already showed symptoms and that they were. So now when we go, for example, to the model that came out of Santa Clara County, California, we know that many more people had the antibodies than we had. And as I pointed out yesterday, I'm still not even seeing the mainstream media covering this. If you dig into the study just a little bit, you'll find out that even the people that they actually did these more broadband tests, this more comprehensive test, were still people who responded to a Facebook ad. So it isn't, in that case, even totally representative. And so that brings these percentages of death down even lower. So anyway, we're starting to have some reputable scientists both at Stanford and Yale raising some legitimate questions about some of these models based upon the facts and the data that we put into those models. And, of course, it relates somewhat to the conversation I had today on American Family Radio, which I was pointing out that, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good, accurate numbers going in, the predictions aren't going to be very good coming out on the other side. Well, we have a lot more to cover, but I want to spend some time now talking with Representative Van Taylor, and we will do that right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We now have an opportunity to talk with Representative Van Taylor, individual that, of course, is a decorated Iraqi war veteran, a graduate of Harvard University, as well as an individual that served first in the Texas House of Representatives, then later in the Texas Senate, and, of course, now serves in Congress, representing the 3rd Congressional District. And one of the things that we have actually posted is a press release in which, of course, Representative Van Taylor was saying, this is a time in which we shouldn't be playing politics over something like the payroll protection program. And yet at the same time, a lot of people are having questions about how effective that has been. And of course, the Senate has now passed the coronavirus rescue package and now goes to the House. But first of all, I want to get some perspective on how all that's transpiring. So Representative Van Taylor, always great to have you on the program with us.
Kerby, great to be with you and great to be with everybody out there who's listening right now.
Well, first of all, I would think a number of people would expect that the House will finally pass the payroll protection program. It was passed before, but it ran out of money last Thursday. And one of the things you say is now is not the time for Washington to play games and for politicians to use the hardship of the American people as bargaining chips. Tell us some of the concerns you have.
It has been really heartbreaking and infuriating at the same time, the stories that I have heard, and they are one after the other, whether it's a business owner who is facing foreclosure, whether it's a business owner that, texted me on Friday, I waited as long as I could, but now I'm laying people off on Monday. People are losing their jobs. People are losing their businesses because politicians in Washington decided to play games instead of putting the American people first. This program, it might be imperfect on its edges, but at its core is about keeping people's jobs. It's about making sure people stay on payroll and keeping as many businesses together as possible so we get on the other side of this thing, there is less wreckage. And every day that it's unfunded, more wreckage is created in our economy, more damage is done, more businesses are destroyed, more jobs are destroyed, more families are harmed. And it's really upsetting to watch politicians in Washington play games like this and not fund programs that are so crucial, literally for the lifeblood of our country.
One of the things we pointed out is that in that initial amount that was in there, it looks to me like some of the largest publicly traded companies were able to get to, if you will, the congressional trough first. And so in some respects, the people that got left behind are the people that are giving you phone calls. These are the smaller businesses. These are the smaller churches, the smaller nonprofits. And so in some respects, this money may be even more helpful because up until now, some of the big boys have been able to get there first.
Yeah, and that's why it's just so upsetting that politicians would play games, that they would literally say, we're going to use this as leverage. And what they're using is they're literally standing on the backs of the American people and crushing them. I mean, they're literally causing people to lose their jobs. And I just think that you've lost perspective. It doesn't take long working as a congressman. If you're reaching out to your district, if you're calling people day and night, which I do, I call people all day and all night and reach out to them and say, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. And, there's more desperation than people's voices these days, in the last week, because the plan, the thing they were counting on, the payroll protection plan, which was going to help people keep their jobs and help people keep their businesses, ran out of money. And it was something that we saw coming literally a week before. It was actually in operation for about 2 weeks before it ran out of money. And after the first couple of days, we realized, hey, we need to fund this more. And you watched President Trump say we need to fund it, and you watched Secretary Mnuchin say we need to fund it, and you watched Kevin McCarthy, the Republican minority leader in the U.S. House, say we need to fund this. You watched the Republican leader in the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, say we need to fund this. And so there was an unequivocal signal among Republicans in Congress that we're going to fund this. This is important. We need to do this because of how much stress this country is under and how much stress our small businesses are under. and they desperately need help. And it's just shocking. It's just shocking and upsetting that people would play games with this and quote unquote use it for leverage. I mean, it's just wrong. That's the only way to put it.
Tell us some of the backstory. I know that there will be a vote in the House, according to Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, saying that will be the case. And but at the same time, the original idea was to actually put in about $300 billion to replenish the small business funding program. They ended up with, in this bill, $321 billion, but the whole total is $484 billion. So that comes back to the fact that Democrats said, well, we don't really want a clean bill just to replenish the fund. We want to also add $75 billion for hospitals, $25 billion for testing, some of which I believe was actually in the original CARES Act in the first place. So why indeed are we now voting on this when this could have been something adopted by unanimous consent in the Senate last week, and you could have already passed through this in the House? Tell us some of the backstory, if you might.
Yeah, absolutely. This should have happened 2 weeks ago. It shouldn't have happened because we ran out of money 2 weeks ago tomorrow, Thursday.
Right.
And we saw that coming 3 weeks ago, right? So it's not, there's no, I mean, we knew, hey, this is headed off a cliff. We need to get this, we need to turn the train around and stop it from this disaster from happening. And so what happened was the Democrats said, no, we want more stuff and different things. And, but what's really upsetting is they didn't come to the, you've got to have people come to the table and who are willing to do the deal and understand the deadline and say, look, we have got to help the American people. We've got to make sure people keep their jobs. And the level of economic pain that I see at home in Collin County is very real. I mean, a county that had 300 or 400 unemployment claims every week last year, is 10,000. The North Texas Food Bank, which is headquartered in Plano, they literally they had a 400% increase in demand in a week. I mean, so there are very real needs. As people lose their jobs, as they file for unemployment, and you're trying to keep the number of people filing for unemployment low, you need to keep it to a minimum. And the way you do that is by funding these businesses that then keep people getting payroll. It's a payroll protection plan that focuses on making sure workers get work, they get paid, that businesses survive. And unfortunately, some businesses will fail because of the games that were played in Washington, D.C. over the last 3 weeks. And so what they asked for is they asked for more stuff. And look, at the end of the day, these are things that are, that many things, and certainly I think most of us support, more economic, emergency economic injury disaster loans, EIDL loans, which are, $10 billion more for that program, $50 billion more for disaster loan program account. And so some of these are loans that are grants, and some of them are SBA loans for businesses that have been impacted negatively. There is a repayment component to one of those programs, as a grant component to another program. So, but these are, and then $75 billion for hospital reimbursement. This is an absolutely staggering number, but this is a tremendous challenge. I mean, this is a great challenge, and I just want to say that America is going to beat this. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. You're watching Texas today, just today, has begun elective procedures. That puts a lot of Texans back to work. I mean, I know I was talking to the CEO of a hospital in McKinney, Texas, and he usually has 90 anesthesiologists at work, and he was down to 6 during the epidemic because he couldn't do elective procedures. And it's called elective, but getting a hip replacement isn't a choice. It's something you have to do. You can delay it, which is what's happened. So you've watched that. So that's having that come back online means he's gone from 6 anesthesiologists back to 90. So all those anesthesiologists are back to work, but all those doctors and all those nurses and all those medical professionals are back to work, and that's helping our hospitals get through this and survive. They were really hurting, and that was truly a choice that Texas made about burning personal protective equipment or mask, gowns, what's called PPE, And so we were burning through too much PPE, or worried we were going to burn through too much PPE because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we've stopped. We're in a better place. We've got the reserves so we can start elective procedures back up again. Not all, but most. And so that is a huge boon to those businesses, right, to those hospitals, and obviously to the patients, to the person that needs to have replacement, the person that needs to have a mask removed, the person that needs that elective, what is called an elective procedure, but it's not elective, it's not emergent, like, hey, I've got to have this right now. My appendix has burst. That's not a choice. You have to go operate on that right now. But the person says, hey, I need this procedure here in the future. So I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and America will be better for it.
We'll continue our conversation with Representative Van Taylor right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Representative Van Taylor with us for a few more minutes. And then let me just mention that in the next hour, we'll have an interview that I did with Pastor Jack Graham about some of the emotional issues related to these lockdowns. And then we'll also get into some of the scientific issues as we talk with Dr. Michael Guillen, who is the ABC science reporter. And just as we are talking about this for just a minute, Representative Taylor, we can also say that when we put these hospitals back to work, first of all, I'm afraid that some of these hospitals might have to file for bankruptcy, and we've seen a number of healthcare workers, in some respects, fired or furloughed. But it isn't just the economic issue. The financial cost is huge, but also the medical costs, because many of the preventive screenings, mammograms, colonoscopies have been canceled. Cancers that might have been found go undetected. Chronic conditions might be getting worse because of the lack of regular checkups. So there are not only the economic cost of locking this country down, but there are also the medical costs, the social and mental costs that we'll be talking about a little bit later. And so that's all the more reason to get America back to work, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. And I think we want to be smart about how we get back to work. I think Governor Abbott has been wise to say, look, our personal protective equipment utilization is lower than what we thought. We have stockpiles. We can afford to do this. Let's get our elective procedures going. I was really glad to see that start today. You also watched him open up some of the state parks and then what's called to-go retail. So allowing people to stop by, pick something up, have it put in their trunk, pay by credit card, and sort of drive off. And so that, again, tries to help to get things back to normal. I mean, it's not. It's a process. It's not just a turn the light switch on. It's going to take a while to relocate things. This has been a very dislocating experience for America, and I think, and all of us, every single person who's listening to this today, every American has been impacted by the coronavirus, by the decision to lock the country down. Literally, that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And just to give a understanding of what the last big pandemic, the Spanish flu, which we know today had a death rate of about 1.2%, which is not unsimilar to this particular disease. That actually, America in 1920 had about 100 million people. It killed 675,000 Americans. So that'd be the equivalent of about 2 million Americans dying in today's population, just to kind of draw a line across. And so we have worked hard, sacrificed mightily, and I think we've been very successful thus far in fighting this back. It's not over. Social distancing does work. We need to keep doing it. Keep washing our hands. Don't go, stay in as much as possible. Work from home as if you can, and if you're lucky, you're working from home. A lot of people are not fortunate enough to work from home.
Yes.
And so this is a very challenging time. But at the end of the day, we are winning. We are being successful. We did bend the curve down. I think that we can say that categorically. It got pretty hairy in New York. We brought a lot of extra assets in there. But no one died who didn't have a ventilator. No one died not in a hospital bed. If they died, it's because we did everything we could, and they had all the medical care we could bring to try to help them. So I think we should really be proud of ourselves as Americans for what we've done. It's not over yet, and I think there are some hard economic times yet ahead as we try to rebuild our country. But getting us back to work, I think, is important, and I think that to get back to work, we've got to be in a good, better medical place. And I'm hopeful that the limited reopenings, opening up, getting hospitals back and letting people, go and get that hip replacement. That's important. That's a step forward, and that really helps America. And so I'm excited that Governor Abbott has had the leadership and the foresight to be thoughtful about this, and he's got a lot of people helping him, and he listens to the experts. And I think that's one thing I've always admired about Governor Abbott is that he's a good listener, and he's doing a good job leading our state in terms of making sure that Texas gets back to work and we minimize the damage from this.
One other question I think some people want me to ask you is, where do we go from here? Because the other day we had an editorial that we mentioned, an op-ed by former Senator Phil Gramm, who, of course, was the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, saying, these three stimulus packages have done quite a bit. They've increased federal spending by half, quadrupled the deficit, might even trigger the largest monetary expansion since the Civil War. And you know as well as I do that some of your colleagues say, oh, this is just a down payment. We want to spend even more and more. And I know that Van Taylor, who almost always every year wins the award for being one of the most conservative members of the Texas House, Texas Senate, or even in Congress, you've got to be concerned about some of the money that we're spending right now.
No, I am deeply concerned. We have a very flawed budget process in Washington. I know we've talked about that. The process is broken. It's been broken since we brought it in 1976. We went from a single bill budget to the 12 bill appropriations process, which has just never worked. Haven't had a budget on time in 20 years. I've actually never voted on a budget. Since I've been in Congress, my year and a half here, we have yet to have a budget, even to vote it up or down. So that's how broken the process is in Washington. But yeah, we've got to fix that fiscal piece. At the present time, I'm just focused on trying to save the economy and try to make sure we've got something to come back to when we get out of this. And America is uniquely poised from its ability to. I think the American economy will lead the world in the recovery. I think that we're going to be the best positioned because we've got the best, we've got the deepest pockets, but most importantly, we've got the best people. We've got people that are hardworking, that are innovative, that are thoughtful. We've got some great business leaders. I just want to recognize this is the most challenging business environment that America has ever seen. And I just want to salute all those business people out there that are working hard and making really difficult choices for their business, for their families and for their employees and for their, this is a very hard time for all Americans, especially those business leaders that are having to make the really hard choices. I mean, you think of the CEO who says, I've got 90 anesthesiologists, which are the 6 that are going to get to stay and work, and which are the 83 that aren't going to be here next week and are going to go home for the next month. And so it's exciting to see them get to go back to work. It's exciting to see that hospital get up and running. And I know more stuff's going to get up and running over the next weeks, days, and months, but hard times are still ahead, certainly economically.
Well, Representative Van Taylor, always appreciate you being on the program. And, of course, I know you'll be voting on this tomorrow, and keep us up to date on what's taking place. And it's been great to have you today with us on Point of View.
Thanks, Kirby. Great to be with you.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some of these facts and figures about the pandemic. We're then going to hear from Pastor Jack Graham, and we'll talk about what's the role of the church in terms of mental health. This has always been an important issue, but even more so now that many people are very isolated. And even my most recent booklet that we've been making available to our donors is on loneliness. And then in the third hour, Dr. Michael Guillen will be with us. We'll talk about a couple of things related to this, but also change the topic. He gave a very great message a while back on the difference between your dreams and your destiny, and also maybe even a little bit of some of how he changed his mindset about serving other people when he heard the story about his grandfather. So we'll talk about some of those issues with him. Of course, we'll get into some of the science issues, and I hope that you will appreciate all of that conversation. And just as a program note, don't forget that on Thursday, that is tomorrow, we'll actually have a Millennial Roundtable. Chelsea will be sitting in this chair. We'll have a chance to look at some of these issues from a Millennial Gen Z type of conversation as well. So all that coming up right after these important messages.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. It is Wednesday, and we're going to be talking about a number of things over the next couple of hours. In about 15 minutes, we're going to have a chance to hear from Pastor Jack Graham, who is the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church. I had a chance to do an interview with him as we wanted to talk a little bit about what is the role of the church in terms of mental health. And this is of a real concern because there are other issues associated with this, the lockdown, certainly the case. And Dr. Nicole Saphier, for example, has written something which I think we've known for some time, that for every 1% increase in unemployment, we see up to 3.5% increase in overdose deaths, 1% increase in suicide. So if indeed addressing these mental health issues has always been something the church needs to think about, how do we begin to even more significantly address these during the fact that we have a pandemic? So those would be certainly some issues that we'll be talking about with him. And I might also mention that in the second hour, we're going to have Dr. Michael Guillen with us. And he has been with us before. He served in the past as the ABC science editor. So we'll get into some of the science issues, as well as just a great piece that he has done on video, which you might want to see, on your dreams versus your destiny. So we'll obviously get away from some of the pandemic as well. Some of the articles we've posted. The first one has to do with the announcement on Monday, which I haven't talked about until now, by President Donald Trump for a temporary immigration ban. Now, that is not as comprehensive as you might think that it is. There are still a lot of exemptions for guest worker program, H-1B, and all the rest. But nevertheless, the ban on bringing people here at a time when 20% of individuals are unemployed, 22 million already. And these reports coming from the Rasmussen poll found that about 70% of registered voters believe that the federal government should place a temporary ban on allowing people from another country to enter into the United States. And I think part of that not only is the concern about increasing infection, but also at a time when Americans are losing their jobs, do we want to bring more people into this country who might take those jobs away from Americans? And so when you have 70%, I've seen some polls that even got up on the 80% area, it shows that that's almost universal agreement with that. Oh, there was pushback. There are people saying, well, I think the Statue of Liberty is crying, or this is not the America I know, and all the rest. But if you look at the demographic breakdown, and this is the first article we've posted on the website, so you can read it in its entirety, 82% of Republicans, 66% of independents, 64% of Democrats, majority in every particular case. So nevertheless, one of the issues that we will be certainly talking about today. Also, later, I want to get into the fact that we are now starting to open up some of these states in these countries. Governors in Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Ohio announced on Monday that they're going to kind of reduce some of the curbs on commerce and social activity. The governors in those four states are Republicans. But not to be left out, the Democratic governor in Colorado also said on Tuesday that he would reopen retail stores on May 1st. And, of course, there's been a lot of pushback to the governor in the state of Georgia. So later this hour, we'll get into what has happened there, because it is certainly significant. The second article we've posted, and I will get to this later today, by our friend Victor Davis Hanson, Suppression of Expression Obscures the Truth About the Virus, in which he says, it is interesting. We've recognized in the past there have been certain taboo subjects. You can't question, for example, the models having to do with climate change, and you can't challenge all sorts of issues that we can obviously think about. Always believe the testimonies of people that in the hashtag Me Too movement need to be believed. But he says one of the things that's really odd to him is why is it that you also can't question some of the models and some of the predictions being made about the coronavirus? So we will get to that a little bit later. And then also, I thought I might point out that there's a very good piece coming out now about the number of residents in New York City who are packing up their apartments and heading for the hills or heading for the suburbs to escape the pandemic, some permanently. Some of them are willing to sell their homes, their apartments, simply to get out of the city. And so that is in large part because, indeed, New York City has become an incredible hotspot. And one of the other articles I've posted, we talked about it yesterday by Dennis Prager, but it's on the website today. If half the country's deaths were in Montana, would New York shut down, is the question. And he uses the example. Let's go to two other states, and he uses Georgia and North Carolina, two contiguous states that combined have the population of pretty close to New York City. And he says, imagine just as a thought experiment, if instead half of all the deaths from COVID-19 were happening in Georgia and North Carolina, would the citizens of the New York metro area be willing to close down their schools, stores, restaurants, small businesses, and others? And he's a little bit skeptical about that, but it gets us into how, in some respects, New York City has been the outlier compared to so many other places around the country. And we're now getting a lot more information from our friends in California. I mentioned just the other day that in Santa Clara County, they actually had done a much more systematic survey of individuals to determine maybe how many people had the virus, the coronavirus, and how many might have died of COVID-19. And now coming out of that same study there in Santa Clara County, they've now done some studies on the autopsies and concluded that somebody who died on February 6th, another person who died on February 17th at home, according to the autopsy results, actually, interesting enough, probably died of COVID-19. And so February 6th, February 17th is way before the first recorded death, which is in February 27th. So that is just one more piece of evidence suggesting that maybe the coronavirus was around much earlier than we think. And I think it's kind of an interesting contradiction to some of the things that Victor Davis Hanson points out, because you're not even allowed to suggest that these models are wrong. You're not allowed to suggest that maybe some herd immunity has taken place. And yet now we have some concrete evidence suggesting that just there in Santa Clara County alone, we have evidence of the fact that some people actually had contracted the coronavirus and actually died of COVID-19, and now the autopsies show that. So that is certainly the case. When we come back, we're going to hear from Jack Graham, but then I want to get into how effective were these lockdowns. One researcher, Isaac Ben Israel, actually has done research looking at the infection rates in America, in the UK, Sweden, Italy, Israel, Switzerland, France, Germany, Spain, and found that, quarantining didn't make that much difference. And we now have some researchers from places like Stanford University, as well as from Yale University, Dr. David Katz, who I've quoted before, raising some interesting questions, which may provide some scientific basis for some of the controversy surrounding right now the governors in a number of states, including the governor of the state of Georgia. So we'll get back into all of that. But first of all, I want to hear the interview that we had a chance to do earlier in the week with Dr. and Pastor Jack Graham on the role of the church in healthcare. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
3 dozen states have voter ID laws, but one of those states, Virginia, just struck down the requirement to show identification before voting. The governor signed the bill, arguing that voting is a fundamental right. That is true, and all the more reason to make sure voter fraud does not take place. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama announced a nationwide push to have every state vote by mail and allow people to register online. Progressives have tried to eliminate voter ID laws and promote liberal policies towards voting for years, but they've had limited success until now. Concerns about the virus pandemic, they believe, might provide sufficient justification for altering our election laws. The argument against voter ID is difficult to make in a society that requires identification for just about everything. You need an ID to buy a cell phone. You need an ID to open a bank account. You need an ID to rent or buy a house or to apply for a mortgage. You need an ID to rent a car or even drive a car. You need an ID to get on an airplane, and you need an ID to apply for food stamps or to apply for Medicaid and Social Security. Having the entire nation vote by mail means that all of those votes are cast without any election official overseeing the process. We don't know if there was undue influence or intimidation. We also know that voter registration rolls are often inaccurate and out of date. Someone could vote in place of someone who died, and we might never know it. Absentee voting by mail is helpful for some and can be allowed for certain circumstances, but having all Americans vote by mail is a temptation for voter fraud and would endanger the security and integrity of the election process. The pandemic cannot be used as an excuse for changing elections in America. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're privileged to have with us now Pastor Jack Graham, who is the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church with a congregation of more than 40,000 members, 2 different locations. Individual that is the author of so many books, and I suspect many of you perhaps have even seen some of the PowerPoint presentations that he has done with PowerPoint Ministries. Of course, also an individual that served as the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, even the chairman one year of the National Day of Prayer. So, Pastor Jack Graham, great to have you on the program with us.
Always good to be with you, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, just before we talk about the church and mental health, maybe talk about what happened on Sunday. It was just an incredible day in which you had a chance to interview the governor of the state of Texas, and we also know that the president of the United States was watching that particular broadcast.
It was an amazing convergence. We had talked about inviting the governor to share his faith and something of the plans for Texas going forward, and so Governor Abbott, we interviewed him remotely, of course, and he did an outstanding job and shared his faith and, definitely spoke of our needing the hand of God. I thought it was interesting, the governor of New York, in talking about the comeback of New York and the progress being made there. And he has, I think, overall probably done very well. But in the middle of all that, he said, God had nothing to do with this. God didn't do this. And I thought, boy, what arrogance. And I thought of Psalm 2 where it says, and God laughed. But in contrast to that spirit, our governor, the governor of Texas, spoke of faith, our need of God, his own personal crisis when his back was broken. As a young man, he's been in a wheelchair the rest of his life, but he said, I found when I reached up to God, I found that God's hand was reaching down to me. So it was a wonderful interview, and you can watch it anytime at PrestonWood.org. We'll put it up for people to see in case they haven't seen it. And then, in addition to that, yes, the President of the United States tweeted out that he was going to be watching our service. I'm told he did, and appreciated it very much. And the online opportunities are amazing. And of course, the president's setting a great example to millions of people to get online. He says, it's not the same as being there, according to the president, but he said, I appreciate the opportunity to get on and watch. And he's watched the last 5 weeks, various congregations and churches and pastors. And so all good, and we were blessed and honored and privileged. And of course, because the president tweeted it out, he's got, 40, 50 million followers, I don't know, but many others were added to us, and we got a huge response from not only viewers, watchers, those watching, but professions of faith. And we don't even have it all totaled up, but Decisions for Christ were, it was off the chart. It was just fantastic.
Let's see if we can then also provide a link so those of you that have not had a chance to see that service can do so. And again, you can go to PowerPoint, and we have that link on the website. But just before we get into that topic today, let's talk about the fact that you and Greg Laurie and a number of others have said, isn't it possible that this digital world that we find ourselves in right now might actually be reaching more people for Christ than we would have ever imagined? Because I think I've heard you say that more people have had a chance to watch the broadcast of Prestonwood Baptist Church online than you would ever be able to pack into that sanctuary.
Correct. We have a very large sanctuary, seats 7,000 people, and we go in multiple services, but and that's a big room and a big building, and ultimately there's never going to be a substitute for actual face-to-face gathering. The Scripture's clear on that. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. And so we know that ultimately when we can gather safely, we will do that. And many are going to come back to church, and I hope many who have missed church, maybe some back for the first time, who have maybe been out of church, will get back into buildings and worship services all over the country. And I'm especially concerned. We have a very large church, but all the small churches, most churches are small. You got country churches, small city churches, church plants everywhere. Pray for these because they're struggling, of course, who may not have the resources to do big online services and so on, but they're doing their best and they're keeping their congregations together. But that said, no substitute for local churches serving. We're learning a lot about how we can connect with one another. I was on the phone this morning with one of our well-known members, Dr. Ken Cooper. He has been viewing and on his Bible fellowship class, which is the way we do Sunday school basically. And they're having more in their class than they had when we were gathering. So he was just suggesting, he said, can we keep this going for people, yes, who will get back? I mean, people are going to get back to church. I mean, just like they're going to get back to restaurants. We're all tired of eating out of little windows or picking up our food or whatever, or trying to cook it at home. But people are, going to go back to restaurants. Socialization will will continue. But we are learning a lot about what we can do on the online worship services, how we can add people. We had we were doing it. We were rocking along probably 20, 25,000 people a week online, but it's 10, 20 times that now since this has all started. So we're going to learn whatever we can learn from this, and God can take this whole coronavirus season and turn it into something long-term, healthy for the church. And so we're going to be in fact, I've got a meeting today about it. How can we expand the ministry of the church digitally?
Let's see if we can maybe then talk about for just a minute how we can also reach out to those that are dealing with this issue of mental health. We've had Michael Perrin on the program with us before to talk about, of course, the River Conference, which has been postponed. But a while back, we posted a piece that you did in which you were interviewed with Fox News about depression in the age of COVID-19. It does seem to me that if nothing else, we need to begin to emphasize the importance of reaching reaching out to people that are struggling with mental issues. That was a problem before the sequestering that is taking place and the lockdown that's taking place. It's even a greater issue now, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yes, about 18 months ago, God put it on my heart and the leadership of our church that we would be more invested and intentional regarding ministering to people who are facing emotional struggles, mental issues, whether it's depression, anxiety. Of course, there's addiction, grief, you name them. We actually did a series called Help, a preaching series last fall, where we dealt specifically with many topics of interest where people need help. And so we brought on a pastor minister who is quite equipped to lead this ministry, Michael Perrin, who you had on your program. And we call the program Life Recovery, so he's pastor minister of Life Recovery. And so we're doing many things. We were already doing these things, but now with the online platforms, we're looking at new ways to expand it. For example, Michael Perrin has a large group on Monday night. I mean, it was about 80 to 100 people called the Exchange Life, and it deals with just exchanging truth for lies and on all matters of mental health and addiction. And now that's online. Since he's gone online with it, it's 800-900 people a week, so 10 times increase. So yes, there are people who are struggling. We're reading the statistics, and anxiety, depression, loneliness, isolation, addiction, drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, suicide, and so this is when we as churches, Christians, are stepping up to these new challenges. We had always dealt with these kinds of issues kind of one-on-one, or we had programming. We just decided to go all in on this. You know, there was a time, Kerby, when in churches, I mean, I don't know how long ago, let's say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that if you were depressed or were battling depression, you never mentioned it at church.
Yes.
Because it looked like you were somehow spiritually weak or not living your faith. And now we know so much more about mental health and how it relates to spiritual health. And so we're getting after it, and we're finding not only are we helping a lot of people deal with their particular issues, but it's a huge field, a fertile field for evangelism, because people find themselves without hope and in need of help, and they're turning to God, and we're pointing them to Christ.
Let's take a break. But again, we're just talking about some of these issues. The church really has a role in terms of dealing with this issue of mental health. And as I mentioned before, the National Bureau of Economic Research, for every 1% increase in unemployment, we see a 3.6% increase in overdose deaths, 1% increase in suicide, at a time when our unemployment rate is ticking closer to 20%. We should pay attention to this. And, of course, the lockdown has affected individuals as well. So when we come back, I want to spend some time talking with Pastor Jack Graham about what can churches and pastors do to address this issue of mental health. All that coming up right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. We're going to spend some time just for a few more minutes talking about the role of the church in mental health. We had an opportunity to talk with Pastor Jack Graham, who's the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist Church. But one of the questions I had for him is, what would you say to pastors listening right now, to those who say, I'm just going to preach the gospel and really not going to get into these mental health issues? And here's what he had to say.
Well, preaching the Word of God is, clearly the priority, and therefore the Word of God addresses every one of these issues, whether you're talking about grief or loneliness or bondage / addiction or anxiety, fear, throughout the Bible as I studied this and prepared the messages. And again, I preached on these various topics over time, but, we just concentrated on it, and there's plenty of God's Word to preach. It's just, we have to realize that if a person is facing a mental crisis of some kind, yes, read your Bible. Yes, pray. Yes, practice spiritual disciplines. Yes, go to church. But sometimes just telling people pray more, have more faith, that's not what the Bible teaches regarding these issues. And ultimately, we know spiritual answers provide change in the mind. As the mind goes, the man goes. And it's learning how to think God's way according to Scripture. And so there's a lot of bad psychology and godless counseling, but it's up to the church to give godly counsel and wisdom. So I would say to every pastor, look for yourself, study God's Word, and then look at your people, because I went through, and that's what that article described. I've not dealt with chronic mental health issues as many people do, but I did have a cancer surgery in 2009, and thought I was doing great. I was back in the pulpit a week or two after I had the surgery, but then a big crash came.
And back once again with the interview that we did with, of course, Jack Graham. And so if you would like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And let me just pick up some of those facts and figures for just a minute, because we were talking about this very important issue. And one of those issues is, as I pointed out before, the National Bureau of Economic Research saying that for every 1% increase in unemployment, you end up with about 3.5% increase in overdose deaths. And of course, look at all the deaths of despair that have taken place, 1% increase in suicide. And the reason I quote from the National Bureau of Economic Research is there's been a statistic floating around really since the 1970s, and it actually showed up in the film The Big Short, in which Ben Rickett, which was played by Brad Pitt, of all people, at one point is admonishing these individuals who have decided to short the stock market because they recognize that there's going to be an impending, what turned out to be, Great Recession. And so there they say 1% leads to 40,000 people dying. Well, that data has been questioned a little bit. And so it's important to come and get the right numbers. But we are just talking about, first of all, just the impact of the economic issues. And those are going to be very significant. The mental issues, of course, are significant as well. And those don't even bring in another topic, which is my latest booklet on loneliness. You have a lot of people that are just feeling like the walls are caving in on them. Some things aren't working just right. You can think of people that maybe were borderline agoraphobic and don't want to go outside of the house. Now they're even more fearful about going outside the house, and the levels of depression and anxiety and a number of other issues. And so we've certainly said that we want individuals to read God's Word, memorize Scripture. In Philippians, it talks about that we should be anxious for nothing, but with prayer and supplication, as well as, in a sense, giving thanksgiving to God. We should indeed try to live godly lives in the midst of this, but at the same time, there are just some really significant challenges in the mental health issue that we will certainly be talking about. But just before I take a break, I wanted to come back to what is happening as early as this Friday, and that is, as I pointed out just a minute ago, you've got governors in Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Ohio announcing that they will be removing some of these curbs, some of these orders and things of that nature. And this would allow for commerce. It would allow for a little bit more social activity. Those four states all have Republican governors, but you also have a Democratic governor in Colorado doing the same. But I thought for just a minute, since we have so many Georgia listeners, I'd love to hear from some of you, because it does seem to me that the entire nation right now seems to be criticizing the governor of Georgia, not the only one who's doing this, but nevertheless, the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, allowing some non-essential businesses to reopen as soon as Friday. And interestingly enough, of course, as you might expect, mayors from Atlanta and Savannah and others have criticized him. Some business owners have done so as well. And yet the announcement is that maybe some hair salons, barbershops, even tattoo parlors, I don't know how that happens, massage therapists and others, maybe gyms might open as soon as Friday. What we are finding, though, is many of these small business owners are, in a sense, saying they were caught by surprise, so they may not be ready to ramp up by Friday. But others said, even if you are giving us that opportunity, we are pretty much planning on staying closed until the public health crisis has passed on. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts since you are living in Georgia. And one of the charts that I put out the other day for those of you watching online, or those of you that maybe are watching on Facebook, this is the coronavirus deaths per 100,000. And the red line, if you're looking at it here, is New York City, which we've all seen. But you'll notice there's two lines that are higher. One is New Orleans, but the one that was most interesting, which is off the charts, is Albany, Georgia. So, again, that tended to be kind of a hot spot in the state of Georgia. And so it's one of the reasons why some individuals have said, we've got some real concerns about this. And I can show you one of the other charts that Dr. Deborah Birx put up in just a minute. As a matter of fact, I'm going to wait till after the break. So those of you that want to watch on computer to see that chart, unfortunately, it's a screen capture, even though she put that up on Friday and actually showed you what is happening in all the metropolitan areas around the country. I would think that they would post a chart somewhere. It may be somewhere, but I have yet to find it. But just before we take a break, one of the things I want to put on the table is that there are some people that are at least arguing that a lockdown hasn't been as helpful as we might have thought. And one of those is Professor Isaac Ben Israel. And this is a particular article that has been translated into the English, The End of Exponential Growth, the Decline, and the Spread of the Coronavirus. What he did was look at the infection rates in the U.S., the UK, Sweden, Italy, Israel, Switzerland, France, Germany, and Spain over an 8-week period. And his team's graph showed that, if nothing else, there doesn't seem to be much difference. Basically, irrespective of whether a country quarantined like Israel or went about business as usual like Sweden, coronavirus peaked and subsided in the exact same way. The graphs show that all countries experience almost identical coronavirus infection patterns, with the number of infected peaking in the 6th week and rapidly subsiding in the 8th week. Which brings us back to something Kelly Shackelford said on Friday, and that is many people forget that the reason we talked about these lockdowns or the idea of actually sheltering in place was not because we were convinced that it would reduce the number of people that would be infected, although it probably did some of that. But the primary reason was to flatten the curve. What was the flattening the curve? So that we didn't overstress the various hospital facilities, which of course did happen in Italy, and for a while looked like it was going to happen in New York City. But again, quoting from the professor, he says, quote, "Our analysis shows that this is a consistent pattern across countries. Surprisingly, this pattern is common to countries that have taken a severe lockdown, including an economic paralysis, as well as countries that implemented a far more lenient policy and have continued in ordinary life." So if nothing else, as we now start seeing some of these states beginning the process of doing what they can maybe to get us back to normal, in a sense, we're going to have, if you will, kind of a social experiment and a medical experiment taking place. And so when we come back from the break, I'd love to get some of your comments, 1-800-351-1212. Georgia kind of at the moment in the crosshairs of all the criticism. Up until a couple of days ago, it was almost always Michigan, not because there was the desire to open Michigan up, but because many people thought the governor's orders there were too draconian, too extreme. Now some are criticizing the governor of Georgia, believing that they may be too lax. So we'll come back and take some of your comments and give you a few other facts and figures, one coming from Dr. David Katz at Yale and one from John Ioannis at Stanford University, because they also have raised some really important questions. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A number of governors now talking about plans to reopen, at least partially, some of the things taking place in their particular state. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go first to the state of Georgia. Bruce, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon.
I would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's interesting they would bring up Michigan versus Georgia. I'm one of the snowbirds from Michigan down to Georgia and vice versa.
Wow.
I don't know. Go ahead.
No, you're
all right. And what I find as an interesting perspective, especially with my background, you have two different localities and demographics going on. It's tough when you do a knee-jerk reaction of too little or too much. But each ones are fighting a different number of data, whether it's flawed or it's accurate. So they're reacting to the information they have at hand. I used to live in the metro area of Detroit, so I understand their situation. They're not the healthiest of people, no offense to my Detroit friends, but I've seen their eating habits and what happens is different down here in the South. So we have two different conditions going on, and I think both are reacting as best or as properly as they can. Whether or not they went beyond their governor allowances, that's yet to be seen.
I would certainly agree with you, and I've been quoting today from Dr. Sapphire, who also points out that when we look at some of these risk factors, tobacco use, diet, sedentary lifestyles, things like that, that varies from state to state within even a state. And, I know people all over the state of Michigan, and western Michigan is very different than our friends up in the northern part of Michigan, very different from people in Detroit. Same thing when we talk about Georgia, Atlanta, Savannah, very different than Augusta. I mean, you have too much variability. So it illustrates that even, especially from the national level, the one size fits all makes no sense to me. And I think you could probably agree with that as well. I think I lost Bruce, so let me...
WHO or CDC are telling the truth is still another matter.
Yes. Well, Bruce, I appreciate you starting our conversation off here. I'm going to give a few more people a chance from Georgia. But, of course, if you're from another part of the country, you're welcome to call as well. 1-800-351-1212. Tim in Georgia, I think you want to speak to the governor's orders and decision. What would you like to say?
Well, I don't agree with it. In Georgia, we're having more people test positive every day. Our numbers are going up, and I feel like if we were going to try to help bring the workforce back, it's not opening up bowling alleys, theaters, haircuts. We need to be concerned about people that's trying to provide for their family, not entertainment. So I'm really concerned about what made him have the incentive to reopen and pick those type of things when we've since every day we're going up about 1,000 positive cases of testing for it per day. So I'm really puzzled why we would want to open everything back up and, of all things, pick entertainment things over things that would put a paycheck in the family's hand.
Well, appreciate your comments. Let's give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation again. And we'll go to Georgia, listen on the Good News Network. Randy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make a comment to help people understand about computerized math modeling. My experience as a NASA engineer, back in 1990 and 91, we launched Hubble telescope into orbit. And since then, I've been working with the astronomy community at different symposia. For example, in Baltimore, Maryland, the Space Telescope Institute there at the Johns Hopkins University for about 12 years. And the astronomy community, the astrophysics, astrobiology, planetary geology, astronomy, they're caught up in the same issue. Now, we know about 80% of those people are trying to figure out where man came from. And as a Christian, I know that God created all things.
Right.
He created the earth for man, and here we are. And so they're chasing these models, and none of them are accurate. In fact, we can't even predict the weather on our own planet with these math models. If we could, we'd know every storm years before they ever occur. We can't do that. It's extraordinarily complex. People in mathematics and people in probability sections of mathematics, we all know better. I'm an aerospace engineer. but we all know better than to trust the models. It's like a dream about reality, but it is not reality. And to base all that we see politically and socially on a computerized model, that is a flawed process. It is a gigantic mistake.
Well said. Next hour we're going to be talking with Dr. Michael Guillen, and he has a PhD in physics. And I always say, you guys in physics got it a lot easier because I can't claim to have the kind of expertise you did. But when I was in graduate school, I did put myself through college, in part in graduate school, by programming computers, and we did do some modeling, but it was in the biological area. And when you realize that, you have so many variables. I was even today on American Family Radio talking about that with Tim Wildman and everybody, because in some respects you've got a number of assumptions, and I think anybody that's ever done any computers knows it's a GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you have the wrong estimates on the front end because you've got flawed data from China or Iran, or even what happened in Italy is nothing like what's happened in the United States, you end up with making bad decisions. And so, as you point out, there are real limitations to these models, whether it's climate change models or whether it's these epidemiological models. But I have a lot more to say about that, but let's give at least a few more of you a chance to join the conversation before we come to the top of the hour. So we'll stay in the state of Georgia. Johan, thank you for calling today.
Hey, I just wanted to say I think our governor is doing the best job he can. There's a lot of people criticizing him, but like we talked about it a minute ago, we set these conditions to try to flatten the curve, but it's not meant to prevent people from getting sick or ill. And he's not telling everybody to leave their house. He's not telling them they have to go back to work. He's just saying they can.
And I think some of them are going to make a decision to say, I'm still staying in my house, or I'm not opening my business, or maybe we'll still provide a drive-in service, but nobody's coming in my office. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. So I appreciate your calling. And one of the other pieces that we have here comes from Dr. David Katz. He's at the Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center, in which he felt that, okay, if we're going to use this idea of fighting the pandemic as a war, then let's talk about a surgical strike and really focus on trying to make sure that we protect those people who may indeed be the most vulnerable. But he kind of rejects this idea of the one-size-fits-all model. And then you also have another individual that, and I'll put some of this up maybe when we get to the conversation on Friday, John Ioannidis, who was at Stanford, who said, when he was looking at the evidence here, he just again recognizes that you have to have some kind of balance between the, if you will, medical issues, economic issues, and then, of course, one I just tried to add today, mental health issues. All of those are important parts of this. And so he points out that he says it became very obvious to me that the evidence that we had through the early phases of the pandemic were unreliable, which gets back to some of the points that Randy was making. And so as a result, maybe we need to begin to think through how we can maybe open up some limited parts of our society in order to make that work. Again, I promised for some of you the graph that was up there. If you were looking on the computer right now, you'll see that the number of deaths for New York shoots through very high, but for the other 24 metro areas, it just pretty much hugs the x-axis. And I think illustrates again that New York was one of the biggest hot spots, but some other parts of the country, not so much. Let's take a break. We'll be spending some time talking about this very important issue again with Michael Guillen right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking with our friend Dr. Michael Guillen, and he is an individual that's been on the program before, both by phone and in studio, and I wish we didn't have such a social distancing, because I always love to have him in studio with me and also get a chance to see him and his wife. But nevertheless, he joins us by phone. 3-time Emmy Award winner, an individual that, of course, was a Harvard University instructor. You know him perhaps best as the ABC News science editor, was on Good Morning America 2020, Nightline, and a variety of other host shows in which he was part of that as well. Had his bachelor's degree from UCLA, PhD in physics, mathematics, and astronomy from Cornell University, also having honorary doctorates from the University of Maryland and Pepperdine. We've talked with him in the past about his book, The End of Life as We Know It. We may get to that a little bit later, because there's a whole section there about surveillance, and in light of this pandemic, that's something we've been talking about, whether it would be immunity passports or using surveillance to determine how far you've traveled outside of your home, and some of the things happening in China, but now also happening in the United States. We'll get to that in just a minute. But last time he was on, recommended that you might want to subscribe to his YouTube channel. I have, and have really enjoyed a couple of his past speeches on dream versus destiny and even the warm glow effect. So I thought we might talk about those first, just to give us a little bit of a break from what we're facing day to day. But Dr. Michael Guillen, always great to have you on the program.
Kerby, my brother, it is so good to hear your voice. And yeah, I'm sad that I'm not able to come into the studio. Last time we were there, we had such a good time meeting you and all the Steve and everybody behind the scenes, and it's just a delight to get together with you nonetheless, even if it is just by phone.
And of course, last time we were talking about an event that was coming up, but like all events, that has been postponed, but maybe we'll get back to that. And I certainly want to do all we can to promote some of the things you want to do to reach out to this next generation. But let's, if we can, maybe go to a couple of these YouTube videos. These are talks that you've given in the past, and one of the things I put on the website here is the dream versus destiny. Now, that's important because everybody says you should have a dream. Matter of fact, yesterday we had a guest on here that said this idea that you need to follow your heart is the worst advice you could probably get. And, of course, there have been some that have said, follow your passion. You know, Mike Rowe at Dirty Job says, no, that's not a good idea. You may have a passion for something you're really bad at, but you're getting at it in a different way, because there is a difference between your dream and your destiny. Can you clarify that for us?
Yes, absolutely, Kerby. Dreams originate with us, right? And when I was a kid in East L.A., wrong side of the tracks, East Los Angeles is a very poor Mexican barrio that I grew up in. In the second grade, I had this dream to become a scientist, and that dream is what drove me to get from East LA to UCLA, Cornell, Harvard, and on and on and on. So they originate with you when you sit there and you dream. But destiny originates with something greater than you. Obviously, as a Christian, I believe our destinies originate with the one who made us. We are not accidents. We're all made for a purpose, and that's our destiny. And so in my case, and in so many cases that I have observed and that I mentioned in that speech, which I only excerpted in that one little video, in my case, my destiny ended up being much bigger, much more exciting than my dream. Even though as a second grader growing up, I thought, becoming a scientist was the end-all, be-all. And I'm still a scientist, but I'm so much more. So that, in a nutshell, is the difference between dreams and destinies.
And I might just mention for some of you that might say, I'd love to hear some of this, especially if you're sheltered in place, you got a lot more time, but also, especially if you've got young people, I think they really do tend to resonate with Dr. Guillen. And so you can go to the website, pointofview.net, and certainly find it, or you can go directly to YouTube and find it, but sometimes people have trouble spelling his name. It's Guillen, but we've got the link there, and what you can do is, first of all, watch this one, which lasts about 4.5 minutes, so, your life isn't that busy. You can sit and watch that. That's very significantly excerpted, and it is just one of those that has been posted, and then over in the right-hand corner, you can subscribe to that so that you can have a chance to hear from him on a variety of other issues. And that's part of what I know you want to try to do through Spectacular Science Productions. I know that one of your gifts is to get in front of an audience, do some of these science experiments, and then afterwards, you got these young kids wanting to come home and live with you. They get so excited about this. But until that's the case, these videos have been a way for people to kind of connect up with you, hasn't it?
Yes. Kerby, because the coronavirus put a kibosh on so many of the things that I was, in the thick of doing, just, like the rest of us. I'm nothing special. But, I had been traveling with my good friend, Dr. Rice Brooks, all over the country, all over the world, really, talking to college kids on campus about God's Not Dead, in my case, talking about the rapport between science and Christianity. There's no animosity there, except people who want to gin it up. But that all stopped. Stop, boom. And so I had all these kids who were asking me questions, messaging me, emailing me, and I told my wife, I said, I should have a YouTube channel. Everybody has a YouTube channel. So this would give me a chance to communicate not just one-on-one to these kids, but to anyone who wanted to tune in. And so what I did was, right now I have two, I guess with the YouTube channel you have like two playlists or two series, I guess you'd call it. The one is the one you're referring to that I included with Dreams and Destinies.
Right.
And that series I'm calling Saturdays with Dr. G.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I typically post that on a Saturday by noontime. And then I have another series called Going Viral with Dr. G, where I'm talking about, the coronavirus and so on. But whether and now so far with the Saturdays with Dr. G, what I've done is to just excerpt past speeches that I've given, and I condense them way down. So it might be a 1 hour speech, and I condense it down to 5 minutes, and which is not hard for me to do, because when I was at ABC News doing World News Tonight, I had a minute and a half. Correspondents on World News get about a minute and a half. I remember once pleading with Peter Jennings that a very complicated story. And I said, I need at least a minute 45. And boy, I had to beg and plead, but he finally gave me a minute 45.
Amazing. And for me doing 2-minute commentaries, I can relate to it. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. But, before we leave the topic of dreams versus destiny, I don't want people to misunderstand. I'm all for people dreaming, okay? I don't want to be some kind of skunk at the picnic, especially with kids. I grew up like so many other kids with Disney and Jiminy Cricket, singing, you wish upon a star, your dreams will come true. So as a kid, it's all about wishing and dreaming. But as I grew older and I saw how life really works, that's when I evolved my attitude. I said, yeah, by all means, dream, Kerby.
But have a destiny.
And dream big.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
But there's something even bigger than that. It's destiny.
We'll take a break, and we have a lot more to cover with Dr. Michael Guillen right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
3 dozen states have voter ID laws, but one of those states, Virginia, just struck down the requirement to show identification before voting. The governor signed the bill, arguing that voting is a fundamental right. That is true, and all the more reason to make sure voter fraud does not take place. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama announced a nationwide push to have every state vote by mail and allow people to register online. Progressives have tried to eliminate voter ID laws and promote liberal policies towards voting for years, but they've had limited success until now. Concerns about the virus pandemic, they believe, might provide sufficient justification for altering our election laws. The argument against voter ID is difficult to make in a society that requires identification for just about everything. You need an ID to buy a cell phone. You need an ID to open a bank account. You need an ID to rent or buy a house or to apply for a mortgage. You need an ID to rent a car or even drive a car. You need an ID to get on an airplane, and you need an ID to apply for food stamps or to apply for Medicaid and Social Security. Having the entire nation vote by mail means that all of those votes are cast without any election official overseeing the process. We don't know if there was undue influence or intimidation. We also know that voter registration rolls are often inaccurate and out of date. Someone could vote in place of someone who died, and we might never know it. Absentee voting by mail is helpful for some and can be allowed for certain circumstances, but having all Americans vote by mail is a temptation for voter fraud and would endanger the security and integrity of the election process. The pandemic cannot be used as an excuse for changing elections in America. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Michael Guillen. Let me just mention that we not only have this very good piece, Saturdays with Dr. G, but in just a minute we're going to talk about going viral with Dr. G. But I thought while we did mention the one of dream versus destiny, one of the others, which I think would be just really helpful for all of our listeners, is the warm glow effect. And the reason I bring that up is because you had given that message a while back, and it is, again, just a good illustration and maybe another way to look at that idea of dream and destiny. Are you living for yourself, or are you living for something much greater than that? Can you speak to that for just a minute, if you might?
Yes, absolutely. I'll explain the warm glow effect in a minute. But first, I compare these. There are two categories of worldview. And I talk a lot about that in this book that I just finished writing that will be coming out in the fall. I'll be excited to talk to you more about that in future shows, Kerby. Really, really excited about it. But it's the difference is between what I call a geocentric worldview and a heliocentric worldview. And that just simply makes reference to the fact that, there was once upon a time where we thought the Earth was at the center of the universe. And we learn now that the sun is at the center of the solar system, not even in the center of the universe. So likewise, I find with people, they'll have worldviews that are centered on themselves. So that's what I call a geocentric worldview. Everything revolves around them. It's me, myself, and I. Everything is about them, right? And then there's the other category of worldview, which is that your worldview centers on something bigger than you. And so In talking about the warm glow effect, I spoke, and this was back in 2009 when Dr. Robert Schuller Sr. was still alive. Remember that?
I do.
And the Crystal Cathedral was on the air, and the Hour of Power. It was they filmed it, and it was called the Hour of Power, and then it went all around the world, 30 million viewers. Well, I was one of Dr. Schuller's main go-to guest preachers. We got to know each other very, very well. I miss him dearly. He was a tremendous man. Anyway, so he invited me to talk. He invited me to come and preach one morning, and I decided to do it on the warm glow effect. What that means is that what science is discovering, this is scientific now, when we do something for somebody else, something for a cause greater than ourselves, then the scientific research shows that we accrue very many benefits ourselves. So whether it's a longer life, quicker healing, greater sense of joy and purpose and meaning in our lives, there's a whole constellation of benefits that we have when we do things for other people. And that constellation of benefits is called the warm glow effect. So I coined the term give and glow, that the more you give to others, the more you glow. And so this was just, the sermon that I gave was just to tell people that I had lived, and I'm ashamed to say this, but much of my life was just spent pursuing my dream, getting back to dreamers, my dream. Dreams can be very kind of possessive. You get a dream into your head, you get a dream into your heart, and, sometimes it can go, you can sacrifice people, you use people to get to your dream, and so forth. And I was very driven, Kerby, when I was young and possessed of this dream to become a scientist. It was I had just a single-minded experience by pursuing everything I needed to do to become a scientist. So in that sermon, The Warm Glow Effect, I recounted that. And then I said, it was in, 2006, when Dr. Jack Templeton of the Templeton Foundation, now he had just taken over from his dad, Sir John Templeton. He had just taken over the reins because his dad died. And Jack and I also became friends, like Schuller and I mean, I've been so blessed, Kerby. I've had so many just wonderful men of God in my life. Schuller is one of them. Templeton is the other. And his wife just recently passed away, Pina. She was just a lovely, lovely lady. Anyway, I miss these guys tremendously. But Jack called me for a favor. I'll never forget, it was on a Saturday morning, and it ended up him asking me to produce a movie and to create an online thing, gave me $10 million to do that. It was a chance of a lifetime for me. It was really just extraordinary experience. But it was then that I began discovering the world of philanthropy.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying to you, Kerby? It wasn't just about making a movie or whatever, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, I'm getting to know Dr. Jack Templeton, and the whole world of philanthropy was new to me because I was in the commercial world. ABC News, it's a kind of a rock and roll world. It's very Darwinian. It's all about you, egos and limousines and five-star hotel, all that baloney. And all of a sudden, boom, I'm in the world of philanthropy. And that's when I discovered this warm glow effect. And I even created, I think at one point we palled up with AOL to create a philanthropic website on the air, on the internet. And I came up with something, I think I called it the Glow Meter. I think it was called the Glow Meter.
Yes.
Anyway, where, it asks you like 10 questions, and then do you glow like a 5-watt bulb, a 25-watt bulb, a 100-watt bulb? How much, in other words, how philanthropic are you? And that translates into how much of a glow you experience. So that was quite a thing for me, yeah.
Well, again, just some great material. And again, we have information, of course, about you and even the Philanthropy Project and all the rest. But let's, if we can, then move to the other, Going Viral with Dr. G. Now, you developed this in large part because you recognize that, as you said, we're at war with a coronavirus. And right now, maybe as a way to help people just kind of get through this, you also address some of these scientific issues, and one of those we just talked about last hour, and that is these scientific models. because if you have ever developed a scientific model, I know you probably have, I did some of that in graduate school, you recognize that if you don't have good data coming in or you don't have good assumptions in the model, you're going to get erroneous results. And it certainly seems more recently like that's exactly what's happened with some of these models. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, exactly. Now, I'll go back to why I launched this Going Viral. And I got to tell you, Kerby, I only launched it about 2-3 weeks ago. And I just checked out this morning now. I have over, over 5,719 views right now. So this thing is taking off. But I did it because, number one, I was just so chagrined by the misinformation. Good grief, man. You know,
Tell me about it.
Like millions of,
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I told my wife, Laurel, I said, you know what? I'm a scientist and I'm a journalist. I can't sit here quietly and watch this happen. I mean, so I just started it. It was kind of just an impulse, and now it's just taking off. And so, yes, the one you're referring to is what I try to come up with catchy titles.
Mm-hmm.
That one's called Inside the Land of Make-Believe.
Yep, Land of Make-Believe.
Inside the Land of Make-Believe, right?
Part number one.
And it was a three-parter.
Yeah.
Episode 5. And, yeah, I talk about modeling. And I talk about how modeling can go wrong. I mean, models, when they're done well, can be very useful. You know, the insurance companies use modeling to try to model how we age and therefore determine what premiums to charge us and they have to make a profit. So their models, are fairly accurate. But then you get into people trying to model this pandemic, and it's been an utter disaster. I mean, an utter disaster, and it's played out in front of everybody. But it didn't surprise me because I know how the sausage is made. I'm a scientist, and I've been doing modeling, pretty much all my adult life. And I give a couple of cute examples in the video. I try. By the way, these videos, like I say to people, they're information, honest. Information that you can confirm for yourself. This is not these are not me spouting off my opinion, okay? Who cares what my opinions are? All I care about is giving people an honest, factual information, okay? That's all my whole life has been about. I'm not one of these guys who thinks the world needs to know what Michael Guillen thinks about anything. My opinion don't matter anything, to use a vernacular. Okay, Kerby, what matters to me is truth, facts, honesty. And then I salt it with little anecdotes, we have some fun. But in the case of this 3-part modeling series, I give specific examples of how models in the past have gone wrong. And one of them is, like you say, if you have faulty data or if you have a faulty model, which often happens, then you're going to get faulty results.
Well, let's take a break and find out a little bit more about that, because I want to talk about that and talk about surveillance. And again, just encourage you, if you haven't subscribed to his YouTube channel, think you'll benefit. We'll be back right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join with us, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us Dr. Michael Guillen. Let me just again encourage you to find out more about going viral with Dr. G. And we have been talking about episodes 5, 6, and 7, Inside the Land of Make-Believe, and some of these models. And Michael, one of the things is earlier today I was on another radio program, American Family Radio, and they were asking me about these models. And I said, one of the things that was kind of interesting from a political point of view is Cheryl Atkinson, used to be a CBS reporter, a while back made a good statement, and that is the press should have been asking when these models began to surface, what reliance do you have? Where do these models come from? What are the assumptions in that? But the press was so busy either accusing the president of acting too rashly by having a ban on travel from China, calling him xenophobic, or then now more recently saying he didn't do enough in February, that they never really asked the important questions. And those are the questions, in a sense, you're asking, because if you have people say, look, I want you to develop a policy or an insurance policy or a government policy, whatever it might be, based on a model, you need to have some assurance that that model is correct. So tell us a little bit more about what we'll find if we watch your episodes there on Inside the Land of Make-Believe.
Well, just so people get the reference to Land of Make-Believe, is modeling is really our way of trying to simulate reality, right? We're trying to simulate reality. Why? Because we want to try to make predictions about the future. I could, Kerby, I could do so many things on this. After Newton came up with his 3 laws of mechanics, there was a whole movement in science that thought they could use the 3 laws of mechanics to predict everything about society, that they could use it to predict human behavior even. It's a really fascinating time in the history. That would have been the early 1700s. So modeling today is a kind of an extension of that. It's the conceit that somehow we can look at a complicated situation like a pandemic or whatever it is, and we can identify all the relevant variables, and then we can put them together into a simulation of reality, and then turn the crank and make some predictions about outcomes. The problem with the pandemic, it's very instructive, and it's going to be very interesting to see what the fallout is on this, Kerby. But the problem with the pandemic, apart from the ones you just so correctly articulated, is at the Imperial College, the one that really created the firestorm. Remember that? That would have been about 3 weeks ago or so. It was just
from United Kingdom, UK, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And all the reporters glommed onto it because I'll be honest with you, okay, and I don't mean to be unkind, but, I've been a journalist all my life. I know half the people who are still on the air. They're just not the brightest bulbs on the tree.
And they did not major in science, too. I found that out to be.
No, they didn't. And that's the problem. And time again, when it comes to science-related stories, which are clearly my specialty, I've been doing it for more decades than I care to admit to, but any time a science story broke, I could predict that these reporters they didn't know what they were talking about, Kerby. And the worst part was they didn't acknowledge that they didn't know what they were talking about. Do you understand? In other words, it's one thing not to know something. You can be forgiven for that. I don't know everything about everything. You don't know everything about everything, although it comes pretty close. You're something, I'll tell you. But, but when you realize you don't know something about something, then do your homework, doggone it. But these reporters won't do it, either because they're too lazy or they're too busy or a combination of both. So when that model from the Imperial College in the UK came out and said 2.2 million Americans were going to die, oh, my gosh, it was like a hornet's nest.
Yep.
And nobody stopped to think, really, 2.2 million? I mean, come on. And that was where in the early days when we didn't know what the death rate was. We didn't know even the simplest parameters. And yet these reporters, not one of them, Kerby, not one of them, stopped to question it, to say, you know what, this is a little over the top. Let me check into this. Had they done so, they would have found out right away that that model was based on very, very speculative assumptions, to say the least. I'm being kind.
Yes.
And number two, it was never published. It was never peer-reviewed. And so, you know, suddenly this unpeer-reviewed, unreviewed, unsubstantiated model is now determining government policy. It's got all the reporters up in a tizzy. I mean, this is just, that's why I started this going viral with Dr. G. I just sat there and watched this, and I told Laurel, I said, I can't take this anymore. I mean, these people are knuckleheads. And I just want to give, you know, it's like little basic tutorials. So in my 3-part modeling series, part 1, which is episode 5,
right,
I just talk about what goes into a model. And then the next 2 are what can go wrong with models. And again, it's not opinionated. It's not political. I make it a point not to be political, okay? I am just giving, you know, I'm giving the facts. And so it's like a little tutorials, but we have fun with it. I have a little fun. I have a sense of humor. And so, and I throw in I spice it up with my little anecdotes and my years as a journalist, travel around the world, covering every disaster. Hey, Kerby, I've often said I've had a disastrous career because I've covered every disaster, you know, mudslides, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and now pandemics. So that's why I did this. The other day I posted, I try to, with it going viral, I post Mondays and Thursdays, okay? Mm-hmm. So this last Monday, I posted something called the World War III generation.
Very good.
Before that, I asked is SARS-CoV-2 ageist, sexist, and racist? Mm-hmm. So again, and I'll give you a little hint. I'll give you your listeners a little hint about the video that I will be posting tomorrow. Here's the title, but don't ask me what it is. I don't want to give it away. I'll just give you the title, okay? This is a little tease. It's going to be called There Was No Toilet Paper in Eden. So what do you think of that?
No, very good. So I'll have to watch it tomorrow and find out where we are taking that. Just before we take a break, though, let me get to another issue because we've been talking about these models. But let me hold up for those of you watching online. This is the book, The End of Life as We Know It. Of course, we have another book coming out by Michael pretty soon. But you have a whole section there, which we discussed the very first time we did an interview on surveillance. Well, man, we are now starting to see that not just in China. I went through this the other day. All the surveillance taking place in not just China or South Korea, but a lot of European nations, starting in the United States, wanting to follow people on their cell phones, apps, all of the rest. And so it's almost like you almost need to revise some of the material there because this pandemic has given especially authoritarian leaders in other countries, but even some of the governors, mayors, and people in this country, the authority or at least the permission to surveil us in ways that I don't think the American people would have ever allowed. What are your thoughts?
Well, absolutely. And I talk about in that book, I talk about how 9/11 really was the jumpstart for all that. I mean, 9/11, you know, started us with the Patriots Act and then and the war on terror, and that gave us permission then to start surveilling. Now we have more closed-circuit cameras than we have ever before. And I talk about, you know, when you ask the average person, when you go out of your house, now that's not happening right now, but under normal circumstances, when you leave your house, you drop off the kid, you go get a cup of coffee, you go park your car in the lot and then go into the shopping mall. How many times do you think your image is captured on closed-circuit cameras?
Wow.
And most people will guess about 3 or 4. Wrong. 50. On average, on a daily basis, our images, our comings and goings are captured by, on average, 50 different closed-circuit cameras. Now, it's not just cameras watching us. Now we have facial recognition.
Yes, we do.
Once your image is once your image is captured on these, don't think that, oh well, who cares? It's just a security cam. No. We're not talking about just good old-fashioned security cameras. Okay, We're now talking about security cameras, closed-circuit cameras that are now powered by artificial intelligence. So they can spot you in a crowd. I don't care if you're moving around. They'll spot you in a crowd, and one camera will hand off your image to another camera. So they can piece it together and really reconstruct your whole day.
Just amazing.
And they can all, and your face now can become part of a permanent database. Now, what we're seeing with the pandemic, Kirby, is really 9/11 2.0.
That's right.
Because we're now seeing a ramping up even more than we saw after 9/11, which is saying quite a bit.
Sure.
And now we're talking about, yes, tracking, contact tracing where, okay, if you test positive, they want to know immediately who have you been in contact with over the last 14 days. Now they have apps that are proposing where, your app will tell you where you have been and for how long and who you were with.
Well, we'll talk more about that surveillance with Dr. Michael Guillen right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Okay, for a few more minutes, let me just mention again, we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Michael Guillen. The book that we've been talking about, The End of Life as We Know It, is a Regnery book, a Salem book, and you can find it in your local bookstore, probably, but we've also had links to it as well. Might also hold up my little booklet here that we've been making available to our various donors, A Biblical View on Privacy and Surveillance. It takes you through the FISA courts and the Patriot Act, and then has a whole section on just a biblical view view on surveillance and privacy and practical suggestions. But, Michael, one of the things I'm saying is, in light of everything that's happened, like you said, it's almost 9/11 2.0. Almost need to rewrite a booklet or write a second booklet, and you probably need to add some things to your book, because this has really moved in ways that I wouldn't have anticipated even 6 months ago.
Absolutely. And, just to give your listeners an idea of what we're talking about here, what would you guess is the most spied upon city in the world? Just take a guess.
I always thought it was New York City, but I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's London.
London.
London
Okay.
yes, London has more cameras per capita than any other city in the world. In other words, more cameras looking at their people. Second is Beijing. Third is Chicago. And fourth is New York City.
Yes.
So you've got London, Beijing, Chicago, New York City. That's what we're talking about. And this was before the pandemic. You're absolutely right. I'm going to have to update this book. Now, one of the points I make in this book, and it's very, very applicable today. We're seeing it playing out today, exactly like I say in the book. There are 3 reasons why typically we are willingly, now, this is not just the government doing it to us. What's significant here, Kerby, is that we are allowing it. We are doing this for ourselves for 3 reasons. Number 1, convenience. Number 2, entertainment. Or number 3, security. Those are the 3 major reasons we allow ourselves to be spied on. So, for example, convenience. I mean that when you smart appliance, let's say a smart vacuum, okay, like a Roomba.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you do that end user license, and you check off the end user license in order to use it, and you're signing your rights away, because that little vacuum is spying on your house. I talk about it in the book. It's taking stock of the floor plan of your house, and then that information is handed off to other retailers. So there, for convenience, we're willingly giving up our privacy. The entertainment, same thing. When you go on gaming sites or some fun app, again, you have an end user license, these EULs, but nobody ever reads it. It's all fine print. You remember? I bet you just like me. I just check it out. Yeah, okay, let's get on with it. You buy, let's say, a $500 Samsung TV for your entertainment, and you can talk to it. It'll listen to you. It has a little camera, a little microphone. You sign that end user license right away. You don't care, but what you're doing is you're signing again your rights away. That little camera on that TV set and that microphone can pick you up. Same with all the voice-activated devices. Okay. Now, security. Also, we're willing to give up our rights, our privacy rights, because of security. That happened in 9/11, and now it's happening again in pandemic. So people are saying, well, this will make us more secure. Fewer people will get COVID. Blah 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 blah. And before you know it, when all the dust has settled, Kerby, you look back at the carnage and you say, what have we just done? And the problem is there's no dialing it back. There's no dialing it back. We cannot dial back the world to what it was before 9/11, and I'm willing to bet you we're not going to be able to dial back this world to pre-pandemic days. The rights we're giving away for the sake of security are rights we're giving away pretty much permanently.
One of the things my daughter just sent me while we were doing the broadcast is a video of people finding out how many pieces of information were stored because of Alexa. And, of course, we've talked about even more of that. Of course, we're talking about 5G. Some people saying, can't the Chinese maybe hack into that? I mean, just so many questions that's why we need people in the fields of science and engineering who are Christians. And I know that's really been your burden, to try to get more and more young people to recognize, going into science is important, because these ethical questions, these moral questions, these legal questions need to be addressed. And if we just simply allow people with a non-Christian worldview to continue down this road with a globalist kind of viewpoint, we're going to put ourselves in a lot of danger. So that's kind of another one of the themes that I know has run through your books, as well as some of the material that you have available. But just before we run out of time, I want to one more time point people to your website, point people to the YouTube channel, and talk about some of the resources that are available, because we have provided a link to your website as well, thetruthtour.live, and that's where you can find some material. But are some other places out there where they can get some material or begin to subscribe to your YouTube channels? How can they do that?
Yes, thank you, Kerby. When I was last time on your show, my website was under construction. It is now fully done. It's beautiful. A young man named Tim Jones out of Denver designed it for me. So the one-stop shopping center would be www.michaelguillen.com, M-I-C-H-A-E-L. And Guillen, as you said, is G-U-I-L-L-E-N, like guillotine, G-U-I-L-L-E-N. So michaelguillen.com. Go there, and from there you can go to my Facebook, you can go to my Instagram, my Twitter, my YouTube channel. You can go to the Truth Tour from there. That's the one stop. michaelguillen.com would be where to go.
Well, and we'll certainly put that one back up there as well. But again, give us a little bit of an overview. Once we maybe do have a chance to come back into some level of normalcy, I did mention your website just a minute ago and turn to the Truth Team because this Truth Tour that you've been wanting to do is something I've been excited about. And so do you have plans to eventually hold one of those? Because we are certainly looking forward to giving that promotion when it actually does take place.
Well, Kerby, absolutely. The Truth Tour, for those who haven't heard it, is an effort to reach young people, high school and college-age kids, with the message that there is no conflict between science and Christianity. There is no conflict between science and the Bible. And I do demonstrations in front of the young people. That's a lot of fun, and I give them a message. I tell them my story. And yes, in fact, just before the virus hit, the good folks over at Gateway, Pastor Robert Morris and others there, and the president of King's University there in Southlake were so excited about having me give one of these test events because we want to test it before running, going nationwide.
Sure.
And we were all set to do it. We would be doing it this month, but we're going to be meeting, and as soon as they get the all clear, we're going to be doing it. So stay tuned, Kerby. But yeah, a lot of excitement behind that. We want to run at least one, maybe two more test events here in the Dallas area and maybe elsewhere. And then we'll roll it out, Lord willing, next year nationwide, or maybe at the end of this year. We'll see. Lord willing, maybe we'll even try to get it in at the end of this year, but for sure at the beginning of next year. But that's called the Truth Tour, and people can find out more about it on Truth Tour Live, or just go to michaelguillen.com and click on the Truth Tour.
Yes. Dr. Michael Guillen, always great to have you on the program. I look forward to the next time, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay positive, my brother. God bless you.
We certainly will. And again, we've given you some links on michaelguillen.com, truthtour.live, and then, of course, we have the YouTube possibility for you to subscribe to it. So just a lot of things to help you kind of get through this pandemic and to really begin to educate yourself and to come out on the other side better off than you were. And so let me encourage you to watch Point of View tomorrow. We're going to do our Millennial Roundtable, looking at the Millennial Generation and Generation Z. I think you're really going to enjoy that. And then Friday is our weekend edition, and we'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews and Deborah Debbie Georgiadis will be with us. So it's really still a very good week coming up, and I hope that you will visit our website, pointofview.net, to find all the links that are necessary. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We will see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.